Hello, I'm International Master Andrew Martin, and I'd like to welcome you to this Foxy Openings DVD on the Sveshnikov. The Sveshnikov Sicilian is one of the sharpest openings that black can play, but I hope to demonstrate by showing you the main themes and ideas and some interesting games using this opening that in fact the Sveshnikov can be learned and used successfully in your own games with a minimum of theoretical knowledge. It's the ideal opening for the club player. Black attacks right from the word go, and I think it will furnish you with good results. Without further ado then, on with the show. Well, one of the main attractions of the Sveshnikov variation is the fact that black usually gets an active game. What does this mean though? How does it translate itself into practice? Well, let's take a look at the game Buchinskas versus Ivanchuk, which comes from the European Cup, which was played in Fugen in 2006, to try to illustrate this point. And the first interesting point to note is that Ivanchuk goes into the Sveshnikov via the 4 knights Sicilian move order. Now, the idea of playing this way as black is to avoid the variation with 7 knight d5. For instance, if I go back to knight f6, let me just show you exactly what I mean. If black plays the traditional move order with both knights coming out and then e5, white can play in this position knight d5. Now I'll show later on the DVD, this is not to be feared, but the point of Ivanchuk's move order, and we're going to go back to the game now, is to avoid this setup altogether. Of course, when you play the 4 knights, there are other lines to consider. For instance, there's no need for white to play knight db5 as Buchinskas does here. White can consider moves like knight takes c6. That's one dangerous variation, although I dare say Ivanchuk was very well prepared to meet that. And there are other moves too, like the simple bishop e2, lines which take us away from our desired Sveshnikov position. So I'm not going to recommend this move order, although it is perfectly viable for black and represents a pretty decent way to play. Now in the game, of course, white's threatening knight d6 check. Black can play bishop b4 in that position, but that's got a slightly dubious reputation. So what we get in effect here is transposition back into a Sveshnikov with bishop f4 forcing black's hand because of the pressure on d6. So black has to play e5, and now we get back into a Sveshnikov, which I dare say was to both players' liking. And now here's the traditional jab a6, well timed, because white was threatening knight d5 in that position, pushing the knight back to a3, giving black time to play b5, and now battle is joined. Black is threatening b4 in this position, winning a knight, and therefore white's got a basic choice here. He either takes on f6 straight away, or he plays knight d5, and in either case I'm going to show that black gets pretty decent active chances. Well, at least a lot of the world top players think so, because this position appears regularly in their games. Well, this is very much a question of taste. Bishop takes f6 is a move which damages black's structure. It's actually unfavourable for black to take with the queen in this position, although funnily enough Sveshnikov did do this in the early days because of the simple move knight d5, and after queen d8 white has c4. Okay, we need not concern ourselves with this variation because we're not going to play it. So g takes f6 will be our move. Just going back to the position after b5, the other main line is of course knight d5, and then I'm going to recommend bishop e7, and white can play bishop takes f6 if he wants to, and then a more positional game ensues, a quieter game where black's pawn structure isn't damaged, but white gets a rather free hand initially, and black's got to be a bit careful how he opens up the game for his bishop pair in this position. So it really is a question of taste, and on that day Buchinskas, sorry, these names are a little bit impenetrable, takes on f6, and Ivanchuk takes back with the g-pawn, and now white puts his knight in on that d5 square. Right, what are the main trumps in black's position? Well, I think it's fairly obvious that the first main trump is black's bishop pair. This is a key element in the position, and in particular the dark square bishop. That's the piece white doesn't have, So black is looking to liberate that bishop at the earliest possible opportunity. Certainly black does not want that bishop the whole game through sitting looking at the pawn on d6. So it's really a question of how he actually liberates that bishop. Now the black pawns can't stay as they are for very long, and so black's looking to play f5. This is a key move in the whole black setup, and helps to liberate the bishop if we think about the dark square bishop coming to g7. Certainly black's pawn mass in the centre is a very dynamic aspect of the position. Black all the time is looking to liberate that pawn mass with the help of moves such as f5, f takes e4, and again a second move, f5. So white has got to be very accurate in this position to avoid being swept away by black's activity. Again, black has two choices. On this DVD I'm going to recommend bishop g7 to you, which is the Novosibirsk variation. It's a fairly modern way to approach the position. It looks ridiculous at first sight because the bishop goes to a square where it's simply looking at a pawn. But black's pawn is not going to stay on f6 for very long, I assure you. This line has the benefit of avoiding certain sharp variations, which f5, the other move, encourages. This is also a decent move. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that I think bishop g7 at lower levels will be a move that your opponents are less prepared to meet, and is no less dangerous than f5 and requires a lot less work. So there are a lot of practical advantages in playing this way. At any rate, Buchinskas plays c3, which is one of the main lines, and now black plays f5. Generally in the Novosibirsk variation, black is looking to play f5 as soon as he can, and this will take us back into other lines if black had played the immediate f5. So anyway, again white has a choice. He takes on f5, fair enough. Black recaptures with the bishop. White plays knight c2, and now perhaps a slightly surprising move at first sight, bishop e6, but in general it's quite logical. Now white gets his play in this position through A, domination of the d5 square, and B, a quest to hunt down the light square bishop. Black doesn't really want to be surrendering his light square bishop in this position too soon, because then the defects in his setup will start to appear. In general, the light square bishop is of key importance for black in a position like this, because it holds a lot of tender light squares together. So white is looking to target that bishop, and black should avoid exchanging it where he can. So this is why Ivanchuk moves aside. It looks like a defensive move at the outset, but it's got a number of advantages. The bishop moves out of harm's way, and black is now thinking about playing f5. So there are lots of positive points to that move, as well as downsides. And of course, you can see once black plays f5, then he really is in business. The dynamic potential of black's position starts to show. Knight ce3, traditional manoeuvre in this line. White is looking to control the key central light squares f5 and d5. So Ivanchuk fights against this by playing knight to e7. Not at all a passive move. White doesn't really want to relinquish control of d5, so white plays the logical move g3. Taking on e7 in this position, well, that doesn't lead to very much. Queen takes e7, and black is ready for f5 here. I don't think knight d5 in this position does a great deal. Black can simply slide across with queen b7, and he's very, very comfortable here. In fact, I prefer black's position, because all white's done is exchange off his developed pieces. He seems to have taken an awful long time to put that knight on d5, to the detriment of his other pieces lying on the back rank. And so it's no surprise white just plays g3 here, and when you think about it, that's very logical. He just wants to put the bishop on g2 and reinforce control of d5. For white, it's all about light squares. For black, it's a twofold thing, well, threefold in many ways. It's all about dark squares, it's all about combating white's hold on the light squares, and it's all about activating your position with moves like f5, which get the two bishops working. Ivanchuk takes on d5 and castles. White plays bishop g2, and now another traditional idea in this line, a5. So black shows with this move he's not limited in activity to just playing f5. There are other strings to his bow as well. A minority attack beckons with rook b8 and then b4, which is logical. And if we think in terms of black playing f5 and then maybe e4 or f4, getting this guy working on g7, then maybe pressure can be brought to bear against c3. In this position, white's knight on d5 looks very impressive, but is it a case of the knight being all dressed up and nowhere to go? We will see. White castles. Black plays rook b8, fair enough. Queen d2, queen d7. The thing that struck me when I first saw this game was the unhurried nature of Ivanchuk's preparation for f5. He doesn't play the move straight away. Instead he waits, and by waiting he increases the move's power. Now white plays f4. Finally black goes to work with f5. I think in that position white was probably threatening f5, so if black had gone b4, white can certainly consider the move f5. And the point of this move is that after bishop takes f5, rook takes f5, queen takes f5, knight e7 check is a complete disaster for black. So f5 is very good, blocks the white threat, and is at the same time very thematic. Rook ac1. White seems to be running out of ideas, but this is prophylaxis against black playing b4. If black now played b4, white would take, and the c file opens up for the rooks. So king h8. Another typical move in this line. This game is so full of typical black ideas. That's why I'm showing it to you in many ways. The king is much safer on h8 than it is on g8. In general, white is less prepared to attack black on the dark squares in this position. So the king gets out of the way, and Ivanchuk is now finally starting to think about active moves. Rook fd1. Self-explanatory. Rook fc8. Black brings his pieces into good squares on the queen side. b4. And now a very good move, e4. Finally the dark square bishop starts to play chess, and once that bishop comes into the game, white suddenly is under some pressure. g4. White is not afraid of his esteemed opponent. He knows that his bishop on g2 is locked in, and so he is trying hard to liberate that bishop. A takes b4. Play on the dark squares, very important. Knight takes g4. Knight takes b4. And now an interesting move, bishop g8. Well, that is a funny looking move, but the point of it is clear. Black wants to take on c3. Obviously white can take on d6 in this position. He didn't. He played a kind of similar move to black's king h8, king h1. But if he takes on d6, then the power of the bishops really starts to show itself. And black has an interesting choice here between queen a7 check, keeping the queens on, and taking on c3, or taking the queens off and then taking on c3, in both cases with excellent play. For instance, let's see this, queen takes, rook takes, and now maybe bishop takes c3. Suddenly black is in business, and all the white pieces seem hamstrung in many ways. For instance, what is white to do about the threat of bishop d4 check here, for instance, uncovering a sudden attack against the unprotected rook. So that's why white goes king h1. He sees all these tactics coming up, typical Sveshnikov tactics, and he tries to back off. d5, another excellent move, swapping advantages. G takes f5. Obviously white can take on d5 in this position, but the problem with that is he gets pinned, and I'm not sure I see how white is going to get out of this pin. So black is working with tactics all the time. It's very, very typical of this line that the tactics favour black because of A is safe king, B is two bishops, and C, well, white's pieces are not that well coordinated. So despite the fact white seems to be playing thematically in this game, he really is in danger because the black position is very, very active now, and Ivanchuk is starting to think really about taking white apart on c3. So bishop h3, we can't fault him for that. queen h5. a3, he was getting very worried about that knight. Rook takes c3. Oh dear, this was a move white definitely overlooked, and well, of course it polishes him off straight away, because the problem with white's position is that all his pieces are overloaded. The rook on c1 is now overloaded, the queen is overloaded, skewered to the bishop on h3, and when white takes on c3, Ivanchuk's queen comes straight down and mops up what's left of position on the back rank. So now it's a question of getting all the pieces in. Once Ivanchuk gets a winning position, you're not going to put him off winning the game. So rook b6 is a very good move, threatening rook to g6 check, bishop f5 to stop it, rook f6 hitting the bishop, rook c1, and now queen f3 check, and that's game over. So white decided to resign. Why does he resign? Well, it's pretty simple. We've got to take, recapture, take on f3, rook takes f5, and nobody is going to deny Vasily Ivanchuk from taking the point in this position. So a very good introductory game, a game which shows the dynamic advantages of the black setup. The two bishops, the way that the black pawn chain gave Ivanchuk activity at the right moment, the weak points in white's position, and finally the tactical execution to finish white off. So very instructive stuff, and that gives you a good indication of just how dynamic the Sveshnikov can be. I call upon all black players to fix their attention on the d5 square, because that's going to be my next topic of discussion. The d5 square is, I would say, the key square in the whole Sveshnikov. If white is allowed to dominate that square for any length of time, then black tends to end up with a passive position. And by dominate, I mean not only occupy or control or monitor, but use d5 as a base for future operations. Black must fight tooth and nail against this with counterplay using his pawns, and quite often this move f5, liberating the entire black position, is the first step in undermining white's control of d5. Now we can trace the weakness on d5 right back to e5, and the first game I'm going to show you, which will furnish our discussion, comes from the Pobyedsky Cup in April 2009. Playing white is Katerina Nemchova, playing black is Hervé Lefebvre. These guys are both rated around 2300. In this game, Nemchova played knight db5, black played d6, bishop g5, a6, traditional lines, knight drops back to a3, so no messing this time with the four knights variation, straight into the main line. And now in this game, white played the immediate knight d5, which is just as naked an attempt to take d5 as can possibly be. Black breaks the pin with bishop e7, and now bishop takes f6. Black recaptures with the bishop. Please note, g takes f6 is a bad move this time. It just simply leaves the bishop on e7 misplaced. I mean, if you're going to take back with the g pawn, you don't want your bishop on e7 in a position like this. You want it on g7 or h6, actively placed. So black takes back with the bishop. White plays c3, a logical move, restraining the pawn on b5 and threatening to bring this knight on a3 back into the game, usually to e3. And now black plays bishop g5, just retaining the bishop here for the time being and stepping as far out of the range of the knight on d5 as possible. And so what we get here is a very thematic position for the whole line, and the big question is whether white's control of d5 or occupation really does mean something in this position. Now we saw in the Ivanchuk game earlier how black was able to fight for control of d5. You'll recall Ivanchuk put a bishop on e6 and a knight on e7. But this with his pawns on f6 and a bishop on g7, it was different this time. Obviously black can do something like this, but what we're going to see in this game is white allowed to have control of d5 for quite some time, whilst black works up play elsewhere. Okay, Lefebvre castles, and now white plays another one of these mainline moves, a4, if there's a possible weakness in black's pawn position apart from d6, it has to be the pawns on b5 and a6. And so you routinely see white attacking this this small pawn chain with a4, hoping to force weaknesses. Well, black takes on a4. This is supposed to be the main line. I mean, if you think about it, rook b8 is also a move, but that only gives white advantages. When white takes on b5 in this position, he not only gets the a file for his rook, that's a nice file, he also gets to tie black down to the defence of b5. So this is again not what black wants in the Sveshnikov. I'll be talking about the necessity to play actively at all times a little bit later on. You must avoid falling into a passive position in the Sveshnikov. This is, really the number one rule. And this is why black takes on a4. He understands that his pawn on the a file is weak, but he's hoping to translate that into something dynamic when he plays a5. Rook b8 will follow soon, and then there's some pressure against b2 perhaps. Well, white plays b3. This is Karpov's move. Again, typical Karpov. White just battens down the hatches. He makes his position as rock solid as he can, and he's still thinking about that knight on d5. This is ruling the roost at the moment, or so it seems. And how is black going to shake off white's control of this this magnitude? Well, we will see. King h8. We saw this before in the Ivanchuk game. What is black up to? Well, black is thinking about finally going to play f5. g6 and f5 is very much on black's mind, and this will be a traditional way of gaining counterplay in a position of this type. The king is much safer on h8, and well, if black played f5, then what is the knight on d5 doing? Actually, it's radiating power, but is it not controlling a lot of irrelevant squares? Well, that is black's argument. That's what black's trying to prove. And don't forget, when black plays g6 and f5, he can also think about bringing this rook into the game. It's not out of the question that black may suddenly go rook b7 and then swing the rook across the second rank to enter the attack. I mean, white can scarcely avoid casting kingside in this position, or so it seems. Knight c e3. Nothing seems to be up. g6. He's coming with f5, and now white lashes out with h4. Okay, well, a lot of your opponents are not going to do this. I mean, I can see why white does this. I know it's been played before. I'm not sure I believe it, but it is obviously going to be dangerous. However, I think black should have enough counterplay against white's king in the centre. However, this is sharpening up the game considerably. I mean, a much quieter move for white would be to simply castle, and then black plays f5, and then we get another very typical situation for this line. Please note, when white takes on f5, who knows, maybe that rook is also thinking about swinging across the fourth rank. But for the time being, black has a pretty good game here. I mean, if white's got to stop the black pawns by playing f4, then I really do start to like black's position. Because white is being forced to operate on dark squares in this position, which is not really what he wants to do. And well, with black's dark square bishop coming into the game, I do start to like black here. But at any rate, white in the game played h4. Let's not concern ourselves with that. White is saying, okay, I've got excellent control of the centre. Now it's time to start play elsewhere. Whilst I'm in control of d5, you can't really do very much. And so I'm going to control the game with jabs like h4. Okay, you can take, but then I'm going to try and blow you away with g3, as happened in the game, and then f4. So it's obvious that Nemchova is a pretty uncompromising player. She's really going for it right from the outset. As I say, it's hard to believe what white's doing, because with the king on e1, white's position is like cut in two halves, and it will be interesting to see whether white can actually coordinate the rooks here without actually losing a lot of time. I mean, what is wrong with black's position? Black's already got some counterplay on the b file. The king looks relatively safe on h8. I know white's got open file there with the rook, but how is she going to make the pressure on the h file stronger? Well, we will see. Black took on f4. It's getting very sharp now. There was a check. King comes to d2, and now a really excellent move by Lefebvre. Knight e7. Now this is the type of thing, again, it's tactical in nature. It's very sharp, but I think it's necessary. If we go back one move, the knight isn't really controlling any squares of any relevance on c6. Okay, it's kind of defending the pawn on a5, but the pawn on a5 is really in a position like this of no consequence whatsoever. So he comes back, he understands that the bishop on h4 is on pre, but then he intends to take on d5. So Nemchova ran away. I mean, obviously if she takes on h4, we take on d5, and now black is in very good shape because the queen's attacking the rook there on h4. The knight is threatening to create havoc on various squares, and suddenly black is taking over the game. So going back now to the position after king c1, black gets to take on d5, first stage in undermining the control of d5, also diminishing white's attacking power. Bishop comes out to e6, queen comes up to d2, and now the bishop takes on d5. Bishop takes d5, and now black brings the bishop back to f6. Alright, king c2, bishop g7, giving black additional defensive possibilities. Rook a1, white starts to think about doubling or maybe tripling major pieces on the h-file. Rook c8, rook comes to h3, rook c5, rook a h1, and now a really good move, once again typical Sveshnikov play. I think probably white underestimated this move. Queen f6, counterplay at just the right moment. White is allowed to take on h7, but then after king g8 he's really got to start worrying about black's pressure against c3. Now in the game, I don't know whether this move was prompted by time trouble, Nemchova took on g7. However, I mean, of course, if she plays c4 in this position, then she's got to worry about moves such as queen to b2, and well, this move could prove very troublesome from white's perspective, because black is going to take on b3 with check, and this is going to be pretty uncomfortable for white. Now, going back to the game, rook takes g7 was played, king takes g7 and e5. Now, we know that black can't take on e5 because then the white queen shoots out to h6, but queen f5 check at least saves the day for black. This is a battle for the initiative in full swing. In the Sveshnikov, the initiative is of key importance. I can't stress this too highly. And now rook h8 was black's next excellent move. In general, black plays this game very thematically and very well. I mean, once again, he's concerned only with initiative, and well, rook h8 just exchanges off white's active rook. It's as simple as that. So rook takes h8, king takes h8, queen d4, king g8, stepping aside. Note that white can never take on d6 in this position because the bishop on d5 hangs. So that's why she moves her bishop back to c4. Rook c8, another very interesting move, not allowing white's queen any activity at all. Queen takes d6, a final try. Obviously white can take on d6 with the pawn in this position. But then comes rook d8. And black is getting ready to round up that pawn. And once he rounds up that pawn, the routes are open to the white king. So queen takes d6 was played. Queen takes f4. Queen takes g6 check. It looks like this was time trouble fueled. Queen d6 check. King g7. Queen d5. Queen f2 check. King b1. And now finally the rook gets in on the act. Rook h2, queen g4 check, king h6, and this is a signal that the end of the game is not far away. White has run out of meaningful checks and faces the firing squad on the back rank. And the beautiful finish was bishop e2, queen e1 check, bishop d1, and now queen to d2. No more checks, no more position, and if bishop e2, rook h1. So, okay, a bit of a messy game all the way through. But you couldn't say that white's control of d5 gave her any especial advantage in this game. And working thematically, black was able to undermine that control and fashion a strong counterattack. Well, I can't stress too highly how important it is to think about d5 in the Sveshnikov. I'm going to hammer at this time and time again on the DVD because I think it's a fundamental importance to the understanding of this whole open. And my next game is a game you probably won't have seen before, but it is very thematic and interesting, and you can learn a lot from it. It's a correspondence game. It comes from the Gipstis Memorial Tournament in 2004. Playing white is Alexander Bragin, graded 2483. Playing black, Semen Pinkovetsky, who's graded 2666. Quite how much we can read into these correspondence ratings I do not know, because a lot of these guys are just using engines. However, what we're going to get is a pretty interesting and thematic game here. So let's crack on. Now the opening move order is yet another deviation by black. There's nothing wrong with our traditional move order, so I recommend you stick with that. However, in this game, Pinkovetsky played e5, which is actually the Löwenthal or Kalashnikov move order. It's a line which, funnily enough, Sveshnikov himself has played on many occasions when he actually got sick and tired of playing the traditional move order, or where certain lines were coming under very close scrutiny. And it is a respectable deviation for black, there's no doubt about it. However, my slight misgiving about this line is highlighted by the move c4. I think this is a variation basically as black we should avoid. For the club player, it's not as straightforward for black to play this line as it is to play the Sveshnikov proper. Don't forget, we're talking about chess below the level of 2400. I mean, it is important to understand what works and what doesn't work at these levels. And the most important thing at our level of chess is to get a comfortable position which you understand, which you can play. The theoretical status of this position is neither here nor there, as long as black gets a comfortable position. We're not worried about slight edges one way or the other, because that's not club chess. That's normal. That's not normal chess. Maybe you can't relinquish a slight advantage to a Super Grandmaster and get away with it, but we're not playing Super Grandmasters. And my understanding of the position after c4 is that white gets a grip on the game. Okay, black may be able to shake it off, but it's quite difficult. And therefore, it's much better to stick with the straightforward knight f6 and then e5. Although, funnily enough, in our coming game, white doesn't take advantage of the opportunity, and we just get a quick return to the Sveshnikov main line. So, obviously, both players were up for a Sveshnikov on that day, and what we essentially get in the next few moves is a repeat of the game Buchinskas versus Ivanchuk, the first game we saw, where black gets to play f5 early, white takes, starts to redirect his knight to a better central square, and white looks as though he's gaining control of d5 on a grand scale, but black fights against that with knight e7. And so g3 was played, all as we've seen before. Black takes, reducing white's attacking options, castles, bishop g2, and now black hits out with a minority attack, so it's showing another string to his bow. So all as we've seen before, and quite in order from both players. Alright, white castles, and now black sees no reason why he shouldn't play f5 straight away, and that's exactly what Pinkovetsky does. So, traditional and thematic play. And black has a number of ideas in this position. Obviously you can see the initial ideas to get things going for his bishops, to get the central pawns rolling. Now black's thinking about what to do with his rook on a8. He can put it on b8 as Ivanchuk did and play b4. He can think also about playing rook a7 and then swinging the rook across to f7 or maybe even g7. Black's also thinking about tucking his king away into the corner before he starts any direct operations. So there's plenty to think about for both players in this position. White's got this knight on d5, looking impressive, but what exactly is it doing apart from just sitting there? Well, okay, Bragin brings his queen out to h5. Looks very threatening. I mean, white's probably thinking about several ideas in this position. He's thinking about a4. He's thinking about moving his rook to the centre. to try and put pressure on d6. He's thinking about the right moment to play f4. So both players have plenty of choice of ideas in this position. It's a very rich type of middle game we've got in front of us. And now Pinkovetsky plays a very interesting move, b4. Again, very thematic for this line. And if it works, then why not play it? That is the modern style of playing chess. And well, this is a very traditional idea in this variation. The only question is, what happens after c takes b4? Well, Bragin obviously believed what black was doing and went rook fd1. The point of black's move is that when white takes on b4, black intends e4, and suddenly this bishop is really starting to play. If then knight f4, because the knight's under attack, let's understand, then bishop comes to c4, and if rook fc1, then bishop takes b2, highlighting just how quickly the black bishops can come into the game in this line. So that's black's basic idea after b4. So rook fd1 was played. Now e4, isolating the knight on d5 to a degree. Rook ab1 was played. I must admit, when I first saw this game, I thought white should get to work, chipping away at black pawns. I mean, that bishop on g2 is hemmed in, so why not try and get rid of it? Why not try and get rid of the pawn on e4 and get that bishop into the game? Well, the reason white doesn't do this, I think I've figured it out now, is bishop takes d5, rook takes d5, b takes c3. No way does white want that pawn appearing on b2, so he's got to recapture. Now we move in with the bishop. White doubles up. When I first saw this position, I thought, okay, this is probably good for white, because he seems to have pressure on the black king and he's got a grip on the d file. But black can exploit the fact that, the dark square pressure is very important with queen b6 check, king h1, and now the key move e3. This not only saves the day for black. After rook takes d6, black has the crushing e2. So when we see this line, we do understand, and going back to the game now, it's not at all easy for white to just play as he wishes in this position. The two bishops have to be respected. And whilst that bishop on g2 is being blanked out the game by the pawn on e4, white can't really entertain any active notions. So this is why he plays rook ab1. I think already black is in good shape in this position. Rook b8. Okay, it had to come. c4. White decides to shut down the influence of the pawn on b4. b3. Setting up a favourable pawn structure on the queen side. Rook c8. With b3, black isolated that pawn on e4, so white's got to defend it with pieces. And now the rook comes up to c5. So excellent manoeuvring by black, and well, black is at least equal in this position. In many ways, I prefer his position, especially after bishop f1, which is what Bragin played. I mean, I think if white's reduced to this, then black is extremely well positioned. And in particular, look at that strong bishop on g7. So a4, continuing to set up favourable positions on the queen side. Queen e3. Bishop takes d5 at just the right moment. This is the way black takes over the initiative in this game. He chooses the right moment to destroy white's control of d5, and then he moves out with his queen to a5, hitting d5. Now, it's an opposite colour bishop middle game, and in those types of positions, the initiative is of key importance. So this is why queen a5 is such a strong move. It takes over the initiative. White's continually got to worry about black moving in and taking his queenside pawns off. White is in no position to attack the corresponding black pawns on b3 and a4. So suddenly I think black is considerably better in this position. And as the subsequent course of the game shows, black makes it look as though white hardly has a single defensive move to his name. The way he plays this is tremendous. So queen c1 was played, to cut a long story short, taking over the c file and preventing queen takes d5 because of bishop c4. And now black moves in with f4. Again, wholly logical. Black's trying to take over the initiative whilst the white pieces are passive. G takes f4. king h8. We see this commonly. Now black is thinking about attacking on the g file. Queen c4. Rook takes f4. It was really very difficult for white to hold his position together. You know, well, I mean, let's see what is black thinking about. He can be thinking about ideas such as queen d8 to h4. I mean, that pawn on f4 is not going to stay there for very long, and once it's destroyed, routes to f2 and h2 are opened. Basically, in this position, black is playing with an extra rook because the rook on b1 is so passive. So that's why white plays queen c4 to try and free the rook up, but of course he's got to allow black to play rook takes f4. Alright, bishop to g2. Queen comes in to d2. What else has white got apart from the miserable rook f1? And now queen to d4. Black has completely taken over the position. There's not really any good advice to offer white in this position because, you know, he's tied down. He has been forced into a very passive situation by black's active play. Note now how useful the queenside pawns are for black. Really, there's no good advice to offer. White is down to moves like queen a6, rather vague attacking moves. All the relevant attacking options lie with black in this position. But he's still got to play a little bit carefully. So rook f8 was Dragin's move. Alright, first point of this move. If queen takes d6, black was intending to play e3. That demolishes white's king position. Black is threatening e2 in this position. And if f takes, queen takes e3, king h1. The variation is quite simple. And mate looms with queen d1. Mate next move, bishop f1, black takes it off. So going back, that's why white played king h1. But bishop e5 is now an extremely strong move. As I say, the white queen has kind of lost touch with all the important squares. Rook c1, and now e3 was played, and that kind of finishes the job. In fact, white resigned this position. Why does he resign? Well, all sorts of mating ideas are looming here. After f takes e3, queen takes e3, there are numerous weak points in the white camp, and well, black has threats all over the board. He's got threats to c1, he's threatening queen f4, b2 is very weak, a3 is very weak too. So white decided to pack it in. Okay, what did we see here? Well, we saw a very thematic game where control of d5 didn't really mean very much at all. At the right moment, with correct timing, black destroyed white's control of d5 and then went on to take over the whole game. One aspect of the Sveshnikov that I like very much is that white alternatives on the sixth move, once black has played e5, to knight d b5, really aren't that great. Moves such as knight takes c6, knight b3, knight f3, knight f5. We will see as we go through the DVD that these moves simply give black a very comfortable game straight away. So if white wants anything in this position, he's got to play knight b5. Psychologically, somehow with black, that feels good. The fact that you're limiting your opponent so early in the game and kind of forcing the pace. I mean, somehow with black you don't get the opportunity to do that very often. And I think it's one great attraction of the Sveshnikov, the fact that white is channeled into the main line. I mean, I'm not saying that's a bad thing from white's point of view, it's not. But somehow with black I feel good about that. Now, to illustrate my point, I've just chosen a random game. This game comes from Dos Hermanos. It was played in March 2009. It's between two players I've never heard of. Gasparis Gaspar playing white, a very interesting name, and he's playing Tiziano Godani with black, who's graded 2-2-6-2. White played knight b3, to cut a long story short. I mean, this is not the world's greatest move, but funnily enough, I've seen this a lot of times at club level, as white players who are petrified of going into a main line they don't know, just suddenly take play out into some, you know, other line on a whim almost, because they don't want to face black's preparation. Okay, you should be fully confident when you face such moves, because black gets a very good game right away in this particular line with bishop b4. You know, what could be better than that? Black fights for d5 in the most direct possible manner. He sets up threats of knight takes e4, d5 is coming soon. The knight on b3, what's it doing? It's not doing anything at all. So already I think black has a very comfortable game, and bishop b4 is just such a logical move. Well, Gasper plays bishop d3, and now black strikes out with d5. Very, very straightforward play by black, and gives him a very comfortable game after e takes d5, queen takes d5. The black pieces are streaming out. You know, in general terms, black is fine in this position, more than fine, and he already is creating concrete threats. I'm not sure what more you could want with black, actually. So castles by white, what else? Bishop takes c3, and then black castles, completing a very satisfactory opening from the black perspective. Okay, what are white's strengths in this position? Okay, he hasn't got many strengths, but he does have a potentially dangerous dark square bishop. Black's got to be alert to the fact that bishop could create some problems for him. So whatever black does in this position, he's got to be respectful of the dark square bishop. But there's no reason, if black does show due respect, why he shouldn't have an extremely comfortable game. He's well centralised, he's got a strong foothold in the centre, he's got strongly placed pieces. White's pawns are palsied. So, alright, bishop g5. Well, I suppose white could consider a move like bishop a3 in this position. Again, black is very comfortable after rook d8. There's no reason why black shouldn't look to the future with great confidence here. But bishop g5 was played by Gasper, and now black played an excellent move here, knight e4. Okay, well that's a forking move. White decided to play queen h5 in the game. Black took on g5, queen takes g5, and now f5, instantly giving black the slightly better game. The imbalances in the position have been destroyed. Black has regained the bishop, if you like. Now it's level in terms of material, and well, white's got double pawns and his knight on b3. Black, meanwhile, is perfectly coordinated. Again, white's position has to be respected. You can't just blow white away in a position like this. And, you know, white's got open lines in return for double pawns. It was Nigel Short who, when he was ascending to the World Championship in the early 1990s, he tended to play all sorts of positions with double pawns. He surprised a lot of people by his willingness to take on positions which had double pawns in them. But he made the point that double pawns, yes, they are weak, but they do give the inheritor of the double pawns open lines to work with. So this is why white's position has got to be taken seriously here. You can't just win the double pawns by rote almost. White's got open lines to work with, and so with rook on a to d1, he brings his rook onto the open line and threatens discoveries with his bishop. e4, a cold-blooded move. Seeing no useful discoveries, black attacks the bishop. Bishop retreats, queen slots into the square on e5. Okay, knight d4, and now black plays h6. White's position seems to have got a little bit better over the last few moves, with the capture on c6, enfeebling the black pawns, and now the white queen comes into g6. But I still think black is better in this position, despite the fact white seems to be working up some sort of an initiative. Okay, queen takes c2. Bishop d1. Queen c5. Black doesn't see any concrete threats, and so proceeds confidently by taking off white's queenside. Rook takes c6. Queen e7. Of course, it's a different type of game now. Black has won a pawn, so he has to go through a process of consolidation now. And whilst white's position looks impressive, he actually has a problem with his back rank. If white had played a move like h3 or g3, then probably he could hope to work up some threats. As it is, with accurate countermeasures and judicious exchanges, black completely neutralises white's initiative with his next move, rook c8. That's a key move, and of course takes full advantage of the fact that the back rank is weak. Rook takes c8 was played. Well, of course, if rook takes d7 in this position, we play queen takes d7, and then after bishop d7, bang, that's game over. Please note, not rook c1 in this position. And suddenly the boot is on the other foot. But going back to the game, well, rook c8 just snuffs out white's attack. Rook takes c8, bishop takes c8. Now white's a pawn down for nothing. And it's a matter of consolidation and technique now. h3, e3, how many times have we seen this move already? Queen c6. E takes f2 check. King takes f2. Bishop b7. And I'm not sure whether white lost on time here or whether he actually resigned. But that was game over. Black wins. I'm not sure I would have resigned this position myself. I mean, I think white can maybe play on a little bit with moves such as Queen e8 check, but there's no doubt about the fact that black is much better in this position after Queen takes e8, bishop takes e8, and then g5. If bishop d7, let's say f4, and black's next idea is to march the king all the way up into the centre. So white decided not to be tortured by that and resigned. Summarising, the simple point is that white gets nothing on his sixth move if he doesn't go knight db5. This was a typical game, by no means great, but it showed you how quickly black can get a decent position when white plays defensively with knight b3. Now the last game should have given us the clear understanding that passive does not pay in the Sveshnikov. This is an opening of activity and the initiative. And if you go passive with either colour, it tends to react to your immediate disadvantage. Now, just to show you that this applies as much to black as it does to white, I'm going to include a cautionary tale here from the Russian First League played in September 2006 between Timofeyev, playing white, he's graded 2657, and Pavel Smirnov, graded 2613, who is completely unrecognisable as black in this game. In fact, he plays too passively and gets drubbed as a result. Well, we understand the main line now, the traditional opening moves, with white threatening knight d5, so black gives the knight a jab, knight moves back, black plays b5, setting up the threat of b4, white moves in with knight d5, and black plays bishop e7. White takes on f6 in order to keep his knight on d5. Black recaptures. Now white plays c3, threatening to reintroduce the knight into the game via c2, and black retains his bishop with bishop g5. So all absolutely fine so far. Knight c2 castles, all the traditional main line. White makes a strike against the queenside pawns. We've seen this. Black doesn't really want his pawn stranded on b5, so he takes. Rook takes, and now the annoying move for white, a5. When black is thinking about playing moves like rook b8 and slowly getting the move f5 together with ideas such as king h8, g6, and then eventually f5. Alright, well, white is happy to play this position too. Timofeyev plays bishop c4, and now a move, frankly, I don't really understand. Bishop d7. It's as anti a Sveshnikov move as I can see. I mean, it's a passive location for the bishop. Okay, black is eyeing up the rook on a4, but when we compare that move with, let's say, rook b8 or king h8, I don't really like it very much. I think it's a source of black's difficulty in this game. It's almost like a waste of a move, and particularly after knight ce3, where black really is invited to move the knight on c6 to another location. Well, if the threat to a4 isn't there, if it's just illusory, then I don't understand what's happening with this bishop move. It's a passive move. It should be avoided. It doesn't really strike any chord with me whatsoever. And even if it's recommended in the books, I don't believe it. Somehow you have to cast a critical eye on the theory books. If these books tell you one thing and you don't believe it, you should follow your instincts and find out what's wrong with your own assessment of the position. And my own assessment of bishop d7 is it's passive, it's horrible, and it's a waste of time. And as the game shows, it's kind of meaningless. Now this is a game Smirnov would have wanted to forget. I mean, black continues with what looks like thematic moves with g6 and king h8. It's a normal position, except for this bishop on d7, which is kind of interrupting the transfer of the rook across the rank there, should that possibility ever occur. And well, white decides to try and take advantage of that by playing h4. And well, I think this is entirely justified in this position, with that bishop on d7 doing nothing and interrupting black's coordination. Black continues with the passive play here with bishop h6. It's passive play in this game that leads to Smirnov's immediate downfall, and white retreats with rook a2. Now, when the bishop's drifted away from the centre, white's thinking about targeting d6 as well, with ideas such as rook d2. So black has it all to prove, you know, in this position. Black's opening play has not been especially impressive, and it continues with knight e7. Knight f6. Yes, that is a very good move in this position. White would like nothing better than to just simply play rook d2, take off on d6, thank you very much. And white is also thinking about taking off that bishop, leaving his bishop on c4, master of the board. Alright, bishop e6. h5. Why not? Push on. Black isn't doing anything, he's got no counterplay in this position. Smirnov continue with bishop takes c4, inviting white's knight into an excellent location. Bishop g5, and now the crunching move, h takes g6. Again, I stress this was a very poor game by black at the outset, but this guy's graded 2-6-1-3. It just shows you, if it can happen to this guy, it can happen to you. It can happen to you. And the game finished, bishop takes f6, queen h5. Black resigns. The more you look at this position, the more you see checkmate. Not a very funny game for black at all. But black sowed the seeds of his own downfall. I mean, we can trace the error back. Let's go back to bishop c4. Error number 1, bishop d7. Passive. Black was never able to realise his threat against a4. Error number 2. Well, I mean, perhaps black's game is not especially pleasant at this point. Knight e7. Not really doing anything, allowing the white knight into an excellent location. And then just allowing white to run over him with attacking moves. There was really not a shred of black counterplay throughout the entire game. So the moral of the story is clear. Don't play passive in the Sveshnikov, or you are going to lose. Okay, well, it's time now to start constructing our repertoire. I'm going to do this systematically by firstly examining all the white's sixth moves that you're likely to encounter. As I've said before, none of them is really dangerous apart from knight b5. Although they are precisely the type of moves which you're going to encounter at lower levels, because the opponents are going to be quite afraid to go into your main lines of the Sveshnikov, and they're going to want to deviate as quickly as possible, hoping to play a simple game of chess. Well, it's not as simple as that, because against all these superfluous and slightly odd lines, black gets a very reasonable game very quickly. And the first of these strange lines I'm going to consider is knight de2. Now, I normally wouldn't spend much time on a move like this. I mean, this looks unnatural to me. It looks retrograde. It looks almost defensive. But it was mentioned in a recent book called Dangerous Weapons of Sicilian by Grandmaster John Ems and Richard Palliser. And so some of your opponents might have gone home and boned up on this book, and they come to the board expecting to unleash their novelty against you. Now, the thing is that in that book, Ems and Palliser concentrate on the sharp move bishop c5, and then it all gets a bit messy after knight g3, queen b6, queen d2, knight g4, and now knight d5. To be honest, I don't think black should go in for this line. I think it gives white too many hopes, and fortunately black can steer a course around all these sharp possibilities by playing the tried and trusted move bishop b4, which is thematic for the Sveshnikov, and quite regular. Black sets up the threat of knight takes e4. And the first game I'm going to show you comes from the Yugoslav Team Championship in 2000 between a guy called Petrovic and Grandmaster Milos Pavlovic playing with the black pieces. And I'll just show you how straightforward it is for black after bishop b4 to get a reasonable game. Well, in that game, Petrovic played a3. I mean, I think this justifies the move knight e2 to an extent. White is inviting black to take on c3. Of course, this is a ridiculous move because black is ceding the bishop pair for no compensation. White would certainly recapture with the knight. Fortunately for black, bishop a5 is a good move and gives black a very comfortable game immediately. It's just something about the position of that knight. It slows down the kingside development by white, and I just can't see any justification for putting that knight on e2 in this position. Now Petrovic plays b4. Okay, he's trying to make something of it. There was a game of Bogdan Lalic from a recent open tournament in France where his opponent played bishop g5. But black played h6 and happily went on to win a pawn after bishop h4, g5, knight takes e4. Again, white tried to make something of it with b4. Now there are two black pieces on pre at a5 and c3, so the next move is forced. Lalic retreated his bishop to c7, knight d5, and now d6, bishop c4, bishop e6 produced a position where white probably had some compensation for the pawn, but I mean it obviously couldn't give him anything more than equality. As it was in the game, a couple of minor pieces were exchanged. White played the erroneous h4, and now he was in trouble straight away after knight d4, and black went on to win this game. I mean, just dropping back, it is possible that white has better moves than h4 in this position, but with black ready to castle long and with the bishop on g3 stamped out of the game, it's not clear to me that white is enough for the pawn. He may have just about enough, but obviously black is fine. So going back to Petrovic versus Pavlovic, b4 happened, bishop b3, and now black has a serious threat of knight g4. It really is as simple as that. White cannot ignore that threat, and so he has to play h3. Well, it's all looking rather ponderous from where I'm sitting. I just think that once we see this game, we shouldn't be worried or intimidated in any way by knight e2. It's obviously just a move, but it doesn't pose any problems to black. Anyway, black castled. White played g3, and now I think Pavlovic missed a trick. I mean, in the game he played d6. This is a perfectly reasonable move. There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. But I think black can actually play d5 in this position, and that liberates his entire position. The point of this move, and of course it's very thematic, especially now that white has played g3, the point of it is that when white takes, we're going to go knight d4, and this is problematic for white. Black is threatening checkmate on the move on f3. If white takes, black takes back with either bishop or pawn, and the black attack is quite considerable against the white king stuck in the centre. So bishop g2 is probably the best, but then the follow-up move is bishop f5, and if castles, well, what else? We go bishop takes c2 and then bishop b3, and I think black is actually quite a bit better in this position with threats all over the light squares. So going back to Petrovic Pavlovic, of course d6 is fine, the Grandmaster's move is absolutely fine, but I think d5 would have been better. As it is, white continues with his slow play. He comes into d5. Black decides to destroy the d5 knight straight away and put his knight in on d4. So comfortable equality for black in this position. Bishop b2, rook comes to e8, castles, knight takes e2, queen takes e2, and now e4. Cramping white, black is threatening maybe e3, the bishop on b6 is very strong, the bishop on g2 is rather cramped. Okay, rook a d1, e3, as expected, bishop d4, e takes f2, check, queen takes f2, and now Pavlovic completes his development with rook to c8, whereupon white played g4. It's interesting to see that white is invited to take on b6 in this position. I think here black is more than happy to take with the queen, Queen takes b6, a takes b6, and now white has lots of pawn weaknesses. I mean, for the first time in the game, he's got to think about his pawn structure, and if he plays, of course, rook d2, we have a move like rook c3. Now there are, again, pawn weaknesses to worry about. If rook f3, maybe we can move the other rook into e3. And you can see, black has a tremendous initiative. White is going to end up with a bad bishop versus good knight endgame here, at the very best. So just going back to the game, white decides to avoid that with g4, and hope with a threat of g5 to maybe create some pressure against f7. Well, black stopped him. White played a4. Black was happy to take on d4 and play the aforementioned aggressive rook move, rook c3. Once again, we see that, you know, white's bishop is bad vis-a-vis the black knight, and black has considerable pressure against white's pawns. After a5, for instance, and then queen c7. Rook retreats, and now Pavlovich invades with rook e3. Well, if this is the best white can do after knight d e2, I think you can forget the whole variation, because black has a big attack here. White tries to break it by by offering the exchange of rooks. Black obliges, keeping his queen and rook on the c file coordinated, and then just plays a simple move, a6. Well, white's pawn structure has just worsened. The two isolated pawns on the d file do not impress, and the pawns on b4 and a5 are particularly vulnerable. Queen f4, queen e7, queen d2, and now black improves the position of his queen with queen e5. There's a little toing and froing here with queen f4, queen e7, pawn up to g5. I think if white had retreated with queen d2, there's no need for black to repeat the position. There are plenty of other moves to play on for the win. But anyway, white tried g5. H takes, queen takes, rook c2, rook comes to c1, and now perhaps the slightly surprising finishing move, but very effective, knight takes d5. And I'm sure white missed this move. Now the point of it is to overload the white queen. Suddenly the queen has obligations both against e7 and c1, and she can't actually defend herself. Yes, the knight on d5 is on pre two ways, but if white takes that with the queen, c1 hangs. If he takes it with the bishop, g5 hangs. If he leaves it as he is, how is he going to deal with black's threat of, for instance, queen takes g5? It's funny that the white queen can't protect the white rook on c1. So actually, knight takes d5, whilst outwardly modest, is a game-winning move, and thus white decided to resign. Okay, summarising, knight d e2. Well, the fact that Ems and Palliser recommend this move doesn't mean a great deal. There are some tricky sidelines with bishop c5, but black can avoid all those tricks with bishop b4, and in my view obtain a perfectly reasonable position. The next sixth move alternative I'd like to consider for white is the retreat of the knight to f3. This is not an especially effective move, but it is tricky. White can often intend to put the bishop on c4 in this line and try to create some tactics as a result. But my impression is that nevertheless this line is rather slow, and black can move in with the traditional Sveshnikov idea, bishop b4, and immediately get a very comfortable game. Practical examples of this line are scarce. I've chosen a rather random example, the most recent game I can find, a game from the South American Under-20 Girls Championship, which was played in April 2009. Playing white is Samantha Mendoza, and playing black is Vanessa Feliciano. This is a good example of how white can try to throw the kitchen sink at black's position in this variation, but how black has constructed a very solid defence, and not only that, has long-term advantages which can be taken advantage of in a systematic way. Now in this game, Mendoza played bishop d3. This is not the world's greatest move in my opinion, and it encourages black to play the thematic move d5. Going back, to bishop b4. Bishop c4 is far more common, and now the main line runs castles, castles. Now black takes on c3, damaging white's pawns irreparably, grabs the pawn on e4. Not so much to take a pawn as to destroy the white centre. White is supposed to get compensation with bishop a3, but then d6, and now this is the parting of the ways. White has two ways to get his pawn back, but neither of them give white any demonstrable advantage. The first of these is the obvious move, rook e1. Then black should play knight g5. After that, white can take the pawn back with knight takes g5, queen takes g5, and then bishop takes d6. But now the safest move and the most obvious move for black is a simple rook d8. After which black has a very reasonable position. White should play queen f3 here, trying to stir up trouble on f7. But then comes queen f6, queen takes f6, g takes f6, rook a d1, and now bishop f5, with a very comfortable position for black. Both sides have their strengths and weaknesses, but it's my impression that white has more weak pawns and weak points in his position to nurse than black. So back to the position now after d6, and queen e1 is the other, perhaps slightly unnatural looking way to regain the pawn. Then I think knight f6 is a good move, a recommendation of international master John Cox, with the point that after rook d1, black is going e4. A rather sharp move, but after rook takes d6, black has queen a5, attacking the bishop. And if bishop b4, black holds everything together by taking the bishop and retreating the queen to c7. Now there's a sudden fork on d6 and c4. So rook takes f6 is an attempt to maintain momentum. Cox continues with queen takes c4, rook f4, f5. And now suddenly the white position looks rather disjointed. White has a rook completely out of the game. He's got weak pawns on the queen side to nurse. Black is better. Of course, that's by no means forced, but it does give you an indication of what's possible. Now, white may try to avoid that variation by knight d4. Then Cox mentions knight e5, attacking the bishop, bishop e2, and now the simple move, rook e8, immediately giving black an excellent position. One point he notes is that after knight b5, which looks dangerous, knight f3 check is a rather good move. So all in all, after bishop c4, black is in reasonable shape. Probably those lines have to be learned, but there's not an enormous amount to go through. However, bishop d3 and all other moves more or less along the same lines should be answered by d5. A thematic break and a very effective one too. If white takes, black intends to take back with the knight, and if bishop d2, as Mendoza played, black intends to take on c3 and then just to solidly consolidate with bishop d6. And castles h6 brings us to, well, let's go one more move into the game. Rook e1 castles brings us to the end of the opening and time to assess the position. Well, in my view, white has a certain freedom of movement, which to a degree compensates her for her weak pawns. But long term, black is winning this game. You know, black has got to play carefully over the next few moves and consolidate. But there's no way for white to repair the damage on the queen side. It's been done. So this is a variation with no plan B. And if white plays it, he or she has to understand that there's no way back. You've either got to win with some sort of massive attack, or you're not going to win at all. In fact, defeat stares you in the face. So what happens over the next 10 moves or so is that Mendoza throws the kitchen sink at black. But black's position holds fast, as it should do. I mean, there's nothing wrong with what black has done. She's been playing completely logical moves, and her position's rock solid. With queen c7, she reinforces the pawn at e5, which, you know, is a very influential pawn in the centre, controlling important squares, and white cannot make headway. So let's just see the next few moves with black carefully consolidating, moving out the pieces. White is trying to create as much pressure as possible against the black king, but bishop f8 is an economical retreat. In comes white queen, King goes into the corner very carefully, negating threats of knight takes or bishop takes h6. Up comes the rook. Looks very dangerous, doesn't it? But now another very good move by black. Knight e7. Reducing white's attacking power methodically. Taking off the minor pieces. And now rook a d8. Completing an effective period of consolidation. Well, now I think white took a look around the position and got rather desperate. This encouraged Mendoza to go in with bishop takes h6. Unfortunately, this doesn't work. If we go back, I've made a couple of attempts to try to justify this position with white, but in the end, the attack always seems to break down. For instance, after bishop g5, black can stick to very effective neutralisation with rook d5 and queen c6. All the major pieces are out of the range of the bishop on g5. If rook e1, we simply go f6. A brick wall is being put in front of white's attack. And now rook e d8. And now all white has to look forward to is the loss of his queenside. White has no attack to speak of. Black is winning. Going back to the position after rook a d8, white can try to hold fast with rook d3, then comes e4, rook takes, now the bishop's on pre, bishop d6 hitting h2, h3, I mean I think if white takes on e4, let's see, this hasn't changed the fundamental nature of the position. The problem for white is his queenside pawns, and they're not going away, so again black is massively better in this position. Rook b1, b6 doesn't change anything at all. So going back to bishop d6, if h3, queen e7, again white makes a laudable attempt to bring his pieces onto open lines, but then just b6. And again, black is much better in this position. So probably this is a rather depressing position for Mendoza, all things considered, and so she decided to go all in with bishop takes h6. Unfortunately for her, it doesn't work. She has a little bit of fun, but black is defending everything, and more than that, going on to take finally the queenside, which is black's right in this system. Rook f1, and now queen d2, and that really is the end of the game, snuffing out any resistance. The queens will be exchanged, and black ends up a piece ahead for nothing. So a very effective rebuttal there of knight f3, although white didn't play perhaps the critical move. All white can expect after knight f3 is equality at best. Next up, we are going to look at knight b3. This is a move which is played surprisingly often at club level, but well, it really isn't very good for white. Well, at any rate, white can get equality with it, but that's about the only thing that the first player can hope for. And why should white be able to hope for anything with such a passive move? It's very rare in this variation that the knight on b3 finds anything to do at all. It's just an onlooker as play takes place around it. So knight b3 is one of the least attractive options for white, but black still has to know what he's doing against it. So we now feature the game Krepan 2286 versus Grosar 2451, and this game was played in the Slovakian Team Championship in 2003. Pretty straightforward game. Black plays bishop b4. Already black has a reasonable position. He's threatening knight takes e4. And bishop c4 was played by Krepan, which is probably the best move. White makes a token attempt to monitor d5. Now other moves have been played. It's worthwhile taking a look at them. If bishop g5, I think black should hit that bishop straight away with h6, no messing around. If white goes bishop h4, I don't see any reason at all why black shouldn't grab the pawn on offer with g5 and then knight takes e4. You know, you have to be fairly brave in a variation like this. Don't get bluffed, and this is a pawn. So probably going back to h6, white's got a take on f6. Good timing for black would now be bishop takes c3 check and take on f6 with the queen, where it's pretty obvious to me that, you know, only black can be better in this position. White's got this ruined pawn structure on the queen side to consider. Okay, black does have a backward pawn there, but once the pawn reaches d6, it should be relatively easy to defend. Black is perhaps slightly better in this position. Going back to bishop b4, bishop d2 is a typical club player's move. There's nothing wrong with it. It maintains equality, but it's a type of move that gives up any hope of advantage, of course. And black has two good ways against it. I mean, I think the safest way is just to castle. And then if white wants simplification, he can get it with knight d5. Okay, bishop takes d2, check, knight takes d2, and now d6. Gives black easy equality, but perhaps no more. This is a pretty tedious way to handle it with white. But black is still in the game. There's no reason why, you know, this position should be fizzling out. Black can take on d5 and maybe push his f-pawn sometime. That seems pretty reasonable. If black wants to play slightly more sharply after bishop d2, then bishop takes c3 is the way. Bishop takes c3, and now the central advance with d5. There's only one slight risk that black runs in this line. You are giving white two bishops early on in the game. You're getting good civilization after e takes d5, knight takes d5, and quick development. But, you know, two bishops are two bishops. I mean, black is probably equal here, but I think, you know, white would be relatively happy here in relation to the other lines. And please note, after bishop takes c3, knight takes e4, white has queen g4. It's best to avoid this variation with black. Suddenly, white seems to have the attack. So castles is probably the best move, but bishop takes c3 is reasonable. Now we come to bishop c4. After this, Grosar played d6, white castled, and now black takes on c3 and castles himself. And this reaches what I suppose you could call the main line position, where white has two bishops. The trouble is he's got weak pawns, and black's immediately threatening to take one of them on e4. White would love to be able to just defend those pawns, play bishop a3 and go to town against the pawn at d6. So that's the scenario black's got to avoid in this variation. Now in the game, Crepin played queen d3. If he goes bishop g5, once again it's a question of being bold, playing g5 and then grabbing that pawn. The central pawn in chess is very valuable, so why not take it when it's on offer? I think if you run this through the computers, you'll find that black is much better. Emotionally, we might not like this variation because we're smashing up our king, or so it seems, but unless white has a concrete way in to exploit these weaknesses, then we must take this pawn. Modern chess teaches us that if a move is ugly, as long as it works, it has to be played. I mean, that is the mantra of modern chess. If it works, it must be played. So this variation seems to me to be pretty good for black. Going back to castles, white could try the immediate bishop a3. Well, now black chugs into action with knight takes e4. And if queen d3, just to show you an example of the type of tricks black can pull, white goes in with a bishop on d6, bishop f5, excellent move, decoying the queen away from the defence of d6. And if queen d1, we get another decoy with bishop takes c2. So just dropping back one move after bishop f5, white might have to settle for queen takes f5, queen takes d6, which is of course not better for him at all. Black must be at least slightly better in this position. So going back to Crepin versus Grosar, the main line has now become queen to d3, and black effectively neutralises the bishop on e6, bishop on c4 by playing bishop e6. Then comes rook d1, attacking the pawn on d6. Black takes on c4 and plays the most natural move in the world, rook c8. So by very easy means, black has obtained a distinctly attractive position. Queen d3 attacking d6. Knight a5. Just allowing white to exchange off his knight if he likes. The problem for white is he's got several weak pawns, whereas black has only got one weak pawn. Thus the balance of the initiative tends to favour black in this line, because white has quite a lot of liabilities to look after, if you like. Rook b1, knight c4, that was the point of black's knight manoeuvre. Bishop g5, we know what to do against that, and white takes on f6. Queen to f6, knight d2, knight b6. It's becoming obvious the very best white can hope for in this variation is just some sort of draw. Bail out into some sort of drawn endgame. That's the main hope. Well, with the white pieces, you want more than that, I think. Anyway, white continues to manoeuvre. Knight f1. White's thinking about putting that knight on e3 and then monitoring the usual suspects on d5 and f5. Black plays knight a4, attacking c3. It really is difficult for white to regain balance in this position. Black's always jabbing at him, forcing him to make defensive moves. And whereas black can repair his structure with moves like b6, it's impossible for white to play reciprocal ideas. So knight e6. I think that's the last chance for white to take the pawn on d6. So that's exactly what he does. Of course, black recaptures. The rook comes to d7. Black takes on c2. White takes on a7. An exchange of advantages typical for this line. And now white plays knight f5. Why did he play knight f5? Well, black's threats are growing. You know, probably black's main idea in this line is just to bring the rook into the game. Rook c8, coordinate the pieces, and it's just very difficult for white to play similar ideas. So white decides to give up a pawn here in order to get some action together with rook e1. Black coordinates with rook fc8. White gives his king a bit of space. Rook 8 to c3. Queen takes b6, and now final coordination with rook c1. Queen b8 check, king h7, and now perhaps slightly surprisingly, white resigned. Well, the trouble with white's position is he's got no coordination. His rook and queen are a long way away from defending that rook on e1, and if he can't defend the rook on e1, what's he going to play? If he takes on c1, black simply moves in and mates with queen f4 check, and then it's mate next move. If he doesn't take on c1, what is he to play? He can't defend the rook. He's got to go rook f1. Well, then it's very simple. We just go rook takes f1, rook c1 check, and then rook c2 check, after which the king is not long for this world. So a very straightforward game to understand, as are most of these games after inferior sixth move alternatives by white. I mean, white can play 6 knight b3, but I think it's almost totally unpromising. We come now to the game Rogers versus Volgin, both grandmasters. Rogers is white, Australian grandmaster. This game was played in the Val d'Aosta Open tournament in 2002, and it features probably white's best sixth move alternative to knight db5. That is to say, knight f5. There are a few niceties to be observed in this variation, but as long as black is aware of these ideas and the tricks involved surrounding this move, then he gets a good position. And what I liked about this game was Volgin's almost perfect treatment of the variation for black. Now, knight f5, what can we say about it? Well, it's obviously a very desirable move if white can get away with it. White's targeting d6. The knight comes to what looks like a very good outpost. I mean, the knight on b5, the drawback with the knight on b5, of course, is that it can be kicked back with a6 and b5, and black gains time as a result. Well, there's no such time-gaining possibilities here, and certainly g6 is most undesirable for black. Meanwhile, if black plays d6 in this position, then bishop g5 is starting to see him getting tied up, and the knight is thinking about dropping back to e3 in this position, whereupon white's control of d5 is suddenly accelerated. That's a scenario black doesn't want to see in this line. Fortunately, going back to knight f5, black can play the thematic move d5 here and obtain a very good position by so doing. If it wasn't for d5, black would have a pretty lousy game after knight f5. Now the main line runs, and this is how Rogers Volgin continued. E takes d5, bishop takes f5, d takes c6, b to c6. Black's not afraid of the exchange of queens here. I mean, I think if white exchanges queens on d8, black simply recaptures. And white's pawn structure is tighter than black, but unfortunately for white, he's got problems with the pawn at c2. There's no natural way to defend that pawn. So that's why, going back to b takes c6, queen f3, has become established as the main line. And now black's got to be a little bit careful here. Now Volshin played the best move, Queen D7. There is that seems as though at the outset it probably would be inferior to Queen C8. I mean, you can just imagine a white rook coming to the D file in the very near future. But the fact is, Queen C8 is refuted very nicely with Bishop A6, and this is a trick which black should avoid. The main point of this move is disguised. I mean, a queen takes A6, queen takes F5 is forced. Then black seems to have a reasonable move, Bishop D6. What's more, black is keeping the white king stuck in the centre. However, white's next shot is the point of the whole line and is the reason why black should avoid it. The superb move, Bishop H6, which undermines black's position completely. And, well, basically this is quite a deep trap which black should avoid. Fortunately, as I say, black can sidestep this completely with Queen D7. And now battle is joined after Bishop G5, which is the move Rogers played. So white is still putting the pressure on, it seems, with black's shattered pawns and threats to F6. Never mind. E4. Again, we see this maxim that passive play does not pay in the Sveshnikov. You certainly have to learn this line for black, but if you do, after E4 you're going to get a good position, because white hasn't got a comfortable move for his queen here. Well, in the game Rogers played queen to E2. That certainly looks a little bit uncomfortable. Obviously if he goes queen to D1, black plays queen to E6, and that's very reasonable for him, with Bishop B4, Rook B8, Rook D8 on the agenda, all manner of active moves. If white goes Queen E3, then he gets hit by Knight G4, with Bishop C5 very much in the offing. If he goes Queen G3, again he gets hit with Bishop D6, and obviously white can't play Bishop F4 in this position because of Knight H5. So it's funny, going back to E4 now, this is quite an uncomfortable move for black to have to for white to have to face, and explains why Rogers went Queen E2, which is by no means a natural move. But white has a pawn grab in mind. Now in the game, Volshin went Bishop E7 and white took on F6. This was the prelude to a capture on E4. Rook D1 has been suggested, after which black should answer that with Queen E6. Now if Queen C4, angling for a better endgame, black plays Rook B8. Queen takes E6, and now the very interesting move, F takes E6. This has been recommended theoretically. It's a move which is much better than it looks. The first idea is to secure the D5 square for a knight. I mean, black will like nothing better than to establish a knight on D5, and that would be exceptionally strongly placed. But for the time being, white has to deal with the threat to B2. I mean, if he plays B3 in this position, we just develop naturally with Bishop B4, Rook D8, threatening Rook takes D2. If white going backwards, black sticks his knight on D5 with an excellent active position. Going back to F takes E6, well, white could consider a move like Bishop C1 in this position. Then I guess black plays Bishop B4, and again the threat of Knight D5 is quite compelling. So you see, by active pointed development in this line, black is more or less keeping white at bay, and at the same time he is developing serious counterplay of his own. This is the way to handle this line. Well, white took on E4. This was Rogers' idea, and now, maybe surprisingly, black castled, allowing white to take on F6. And we reach another one of these scenarios where black is a pawn down. He's got no less than 5 isolated pawns, 2 of which are doubled, and his king position seems to be shattered. However, the most important feature of this position is the dynamic aspect. White's king is stuck in the middle, and this gives Rogers serious problems in this position. I imagine over the board this is going to be very difficult for white to defend. I mean, mainly because black's rooks are ready to come into the game so quickly. Rook A D8, Rook F E8. Rook F E8 is the immediate threat, and it's very difficult for white to actually repel these threats. Now Rogers felt obliged to move his queen again with Queen D2. I mean, white can gain a little bit of time here with Rook D1 instead. After that, black should certainly play queen d2, queen b7, hitting b2. Now if queen d2, we go queen takes b2, and black's queen can go on the rampage against the white queen side. Okay, white does get his king to safety in this position, but from a pawn up, he's gone to 2 pawns down. The most likely scenario from where I'm sitting is that white will probably regain one of these pawns, and black has to play some long endgame, a pawn up. Well, of course, you know, that's chess. I mean, if you get a pawn up endgame with black, you should be absolutely delighted. So this position is uncomfortable for white, let's face it. And that's why Rogers played queen d2. Rook fe8 is the obvious move. Now comes king d1, and Volshin played queen c7, just with the idea of bringing his other rook into the centre. White blocked with bishop d3, rook a d8, king c1, so play proceeds very naturally now with c5, threatening c4, winning the bishop, and white played b3. Now comes queen e5. It's important in positions of this type not to let the opponent consolidate, so black proceeds with direct threats. This is the way to play positions like this, where you've got fractured structure versus initiative. White needs a little bit of time to settle down and somehow realise the advantages of his position, but at the moment he's pinned on d3, his rook on a1 is en prise, he's forced into the uncomfortable move rook b1, and black has a firm grip on the initiative, which Volshin actually never lets go in this game. He plays the excellent move c4, which opens up the white king and essentially forces a win of material here, again through dynamic considerations. So b takes c4, rook b8. Black is thinking about checkmating white now. Rook takes b8, rook takes b8, queen e3. He gives his king a little bit of room. In comes the queen. King comes to d1. Bishop g4 check. f3. Queen a1 check. And now the problem for white is, of course, queen c1 is answered by rook b1. Let's just see that. Quite easy to understand. Thank you very much. So white is forced to surrender the exchange and hope that he can hang on in this exchange down position where, well, maybe the black king is exposed and white can force some sort of draw. But black is very active here. Yes, well, white can take with a pawn on g4, but I think it's white's king who's even weaker than black's king in this position. So white is forced into this miserable ending. He's got a bishop and a pawn for the exchange. His king and passed pawn on c4 may be able to create some compensation and hopefully make the draw for him, but it's unlikely. I mean, I think with perfect play, black should win this position, but black should be winning with reasonable care. So on we go, king d4. Let's just see how Volshin plays this to win. First stage is to bring the king across, nice and easy. Second stage is to fix the pawns on the king side on light squares, thus enfeebling the bishop on d3. Up comes the king. There's really nothing white can do about it. He's just got to try and hold it together and hope that the roof doesn't cave in. King comes up and now reaches his best square on c7. Now it's a question of how black activates his rook. Well, if white does nothing in this position, I think black can come round via b8. This would be a typical way into white's position, and then I don't think white can hold it together. So bishop d5, just admitting that you can't hold it together. In comes the rook, and finally the rook penetrates. Once black gets a passed pawn in this position, it really is game over. White's still trying his tricks, but they are not going to work here. Black has it all under control. The h pawn is boss. The problem for white with f7 is that the h pawn queens with check. So h3, bishop d5, h2, king f5. It's a mop-up job now. f7, and then the nice move rook takes c5 to finish. White resigns. If he queens his pawn, rook takes d5, followed by h1, queen wins. So a very nice game by Volshin, very efficient and very well observed throughout. You know, black was alert to all of white's tricks, negated them, and went on to score a fine win. That's the way to play against knight f5. Okay, we come now to the game Bjarke Saal 2364 versus world class grandmaster Magnus Carlsen 2673. This game was played in the Norwegian Championship in 2006, and it features an early knight takes c6 by white, which, as you can see, in this case comes from the Löwenthal move order, but which will quickly transpose to our Sveshnikov move order after knight c3 and then knight f6. Now, with knight takes c6, for me it's one of the least attractive options for white on the 6th move. If we draw up a balance sheet alongside knight takes c6, we see very little plus points in the white column, whereas for black we see that the capture on c6 has strengthened black's centre. Black has additional control of d5, and black may even think about playing d5 in the very near future. I think what black's got to avoid in this variation is playing d5 too soon, being tempted. Instead, restraint by black and normal Sicilian play should see him through to a pretty good position. I mean, black should just really develop the bishop on f8 and get castled, and then have a look whether he can play d5 or not. White really can't expect any more than equality at best with this line. However, Saal has his own ideas, and he's kind of specialised in this move f4 over the years, which is of course why we should take a look at it here. It's a very unusual variation. I don't expect you'll have to face this, at all in your games, but if you do, at least you'll know what to do against it. Now, how can white make something out of nothing in this line? Well, obviously the capture on c6 is not a mistake. I mean, let me state that right at the outset. But what it is, of course, is a move which relinquishes the initiative, and that's why most master players wouldn't touch it. It makes black's life too easy. I mean, white can make something of this position. Obviously, white can continue along typical Sicilian lines just simply by developing the pieces. There's nothing to stop white from playing sensible moves here. One sequence might involve bishop d3, castles, queen e2 and king h1, and then white f4. So this is some sort of scaven in. It's not at all like a Sveshnikov now. Black must play it positionally. The best way here is just to take on f4 and go knight g4. Strong point e5. And basically black's got a normal Sicilian scavening setup here with extra moves. White doesn't really have any kingside attack at all here, and black has pretty good play for all his pieces. So that is very satisfactory for black, but okay for white too. I mean, maybe that's white's best chance in this line to make something of it. Obviously white can try a move like bishop c4, which again embarks on the quest to restrain d5, but again black is more than satisfactorily placed after bishop b4. That's an option in the Sveshnikov which black should take when he can. And if white goes bishop g5, because black was threatening knight takes e4, then h6 is the usual jab, and I see no reason at all, if white goes bishop h4, why black shouldn't move in and take the pawn. Sometimes you've got to be brave in chess and ask your opponent, well, what are you doing here? I mean, white's best in this position is to go bishop takes e5, and after queen e7 to go queen d4. Then comes f6, and if this is the best that white can do, with black taking on c3 and then taking on e5, I mean, it really is not especially satisfactory for white. Black obviously has a slight advantage here. The queens are coming off, and the pawn position favours black. But as I say, I mean, after bishop c4, bishop b4, maybe that's the best white can achieve, which really isn't very much. Which brings us full circle back to Saal's original move, f4, and at least here white is trying to put a little bit of pressure on. So let's see how Carlsen meets this idea. Queen to c7. I think at the outset I should say that I think bishop b4 is still a very reasonable move for black. And if queen f3, for instance, black can get on the case immediately with d5 and then bishop g4 with a very active position. Probably after bishop b4, white should go bishop d3, and then we get a relatively normal position occurring. But Carlsen's queen c7 is also interesting, and as you'll see, it encourages white to play the move f5 after black plays a rather obscure idea here, bishop d6. I think Carlsen is trying to steer play away from moves which Saul may have, experienced beforehand, and create an original situation, which is exactly what happens when white blocks with f5 and black goes bishop b4. White is certainly threatening, limbering up for ideas like g4 and then g5 here. So what black's got to do is to regain control over the central squares e4 and d5, and by playing d5 at the right moment, he's going to head off any idea white might have entertained of playing g4. So bishop b4 is right. Saul played a3, black took on c3, messing up white's pawns, and then hit out with a thematic d5. So nothing we haven't seen before, nothing surprising, and now black moves in to immediately attack the pawn on c3. Alright, bishop d2. Both sides castle, and now black takes on e4, gets on the case immediately, plays bishop a6, hitting the rook on f1. The rook moves, black takes on e4, and now plays f6. So this completes a satisfactory opening from black's point of view. Probably this position is about equal, and Carlsen's trying to create a position where the better player is going to win. He's even willing to sacrifice this pawn on c6 in order to do that. White's extra pawn in addition, if he did capture on c6, would be less than impressive, and black has lots of activity for his pieces. Funnily enough, something similar happens in the game with white going queen b4. I mean, I'm not saying white's best choice was not to take on c6, it probably was, but anyway, after queen b4, queen d5, bishop e3, rook a b8, queen a4, bishop c4, rook d2, queen b5, white goes a pawn up temporarily after king takes b5, rook takes b5, bishop takes a7. But Carlsen's idea is that the white pawn position is so fragmented that what counts in this position is the initiative. Opposite colour bishop middle game, stroke late middle game, end games depend heavily on the initiative, and that's exactly what black possesses here. He's got by far the more active position, and he can just place his pieces on very influential squares here. So in fact it's white who is struggling for equality here. Black's main threat, I would have thought, is just to first of all safety his king, and then ideas such as rook b2 and bishop e4, after which he could easily mop up white pawns. It's one of those positions where actually if one white pawn goes, a lot of white pawns might go, whereas the same can't be said for black's tight pawn formation. White lacks activity here. So Saul tried a4, rook b a5, c4, trying to buy black off. Bishop e4. Carlsen understands that when that pawn on f5 falls, any threats to his king on the 7th rank evaporate. So the pawn on f5 is public enemy number 1, which is why of course white defends it with g4. Black goes h6 to give his king a bit of luft, and rook e1 was played by Saul. Rook takes a4, bishop takes h6, looks good for a moment, and now black plays bishop f3. Now we get a little bit of tactical interplay here. Of course, if the bishop retreats from h6, let's say to e3, black has a choice. I mean, he can take on g4, he can take on c4. Either of these moves look good. If pushed, I would certainly think about bishop takes g4 here. Now, as you can see, there are weak white pawns on show all over the place. So white played rook e3 in the game, bishop takes g4, and now rook g3. White's trying to bail out into some sort of rook ending. He gets his wish, but he ends up with two passive rooks against two active rooks. The problem for white is, well, he can't play the obvious move rook dg2 here because of rook a1 and then rook c1, after which black wins a pawn, and with no white counterplay to speak of, it's hard to see how white's going to draw this. Going back to rook a4, if he goes rook d7 in this position, rook takes g4 garners a pawn with tempo. Again, black will emerge at least a pawn up here, maybe two pawns up, and white will be hopelessly placed. So I think it's a very clear-sighted way to play this position by Carlsen. He's seeing that he's going to win material here. Rook b3 is an attempt to create havoc on the 7th and 8th ranks. I mean, white is perhaps intending rook d7 or rook b7, but black elegantly heads this off with rook takes g4 check, rook h4 check, rook ag4 check, e4 check, king e3, and now rook h3 check. Exchanges are forced, and black is material ahead. So Sale decided to resign. Summarising knight takes c6, I think once again, however white plays it, he can only expect an unclear game at best, probably only equality. It's not a very ambitious idea, knight takes c6, and black really shouldn't be too dismayed if any of your opponents try this line. You know, it really is not especially good. I think Carlsen showed a good way here with queen c7, and bishop d6 was certainly an unclear and confusing try, which you may well like to adopt in your own games. In this next section of the DVD, I'm going to discuss a very important variation. That is to say the line where white goes knight db5, which, as we've seen, is his only challenging sixth move. Black plays d6, and now white plays knight d5. In general, this is white's second most common move here after bishop g5. It's a forcing move. In view of white's threat of knight c7 check, black must take. And now the main line position is reached after knight b8, which I believe to be black's best move here, and that assessment is confirmed in most theory books. Obviously black can play knight e7, but the knight on e7 has always struck me as being clumsy. Knight b8 maintains harmony in the black camp, and although that move looks as though black is simply retreating into his shell, in fact black is not going to leave that knight on b8 for long. In general, black's plan in this variation consists of two parts. One, consolidation of the queen side, perhaps repelling the knight with a6. Secondly, looking to advance the pawn majority that he's now suddenly acquired in the centre and on the king side. I've marked the pawn majority in yellow there. Black is looking in the early middle game to advance those pawns and maybe even create a direct attack against the white king. It's in general a positional line, this. Quite sharp. White would be looking to advance his pawns on the queen side, create some counterplay there, try to tie black down. It's a bit King's Indian like, you know, opposite sides initiatives, and therefore I think black has got to be very concrete in this line. He's got to stick to his guns, and he's got to be consistent. Black can't hesitate in this line or waffle around. The best thing to do is to try to advance those pawns as quickly as possible to tie white down. And the first game I'm going to use to illustrate this theme comes from the Russian Championship in 2004 between Andrei Belozerov playing white 2-5-5-2 and Valery Filipov 2-6-3-9 playing black. And the two players follow the main line with c4, which is white's most common move, a6 hitting the knight, knight drops back, and now black simply develops his pieces. Castles, white castles, and now f5 reaches the main line position where both sides are beginning to put their plans into practice. I imagine you will get this type of position quite commonly in your games. Well, now white faces the choice. You know, how does he put a halt to black's kingside ambitions, which are already very real? He's got a basic choice between playing f3 and f4 to stop black's pawns from advancing. In the following game, white played f3, a prophylactic move, and now black played bishop g5. If you think about it, the bishop on e7 is black's bad bishop, locked in behind the central pawns, so it makes perfect sense to get rid of it and exchange it off. I mean, black can play this position in a strategical manner. It's not out of the question that black might be thinking about putting his knight on c5, and once the dark square bishops are exchanged, you know, if we imagine a black knight on c5 and a black pawn on a5, it's actually going to be quite difficult for white to shift that knight. So with the exchange of dark square bishops, black is actually threatening to take over this position strategically. White can scarcely avoid that. I mean, what white's got to do once again is stick to his guns in this position and advance those queenside pawns, and that's exactly what Belozerov did, and which has been seen many times in this position. And good timing was now shown by Filipov when he played a e5. This is a necessary jab. It tries to disjoint the white queenside pawns before they ever get going, and is very logical. And once again, the sequence is forced. White maintains the integrity of his pawn structure with a3. A takes. Now white takes on g5, only move. A takes b4. Off comes the rook. Black activates his queen with queen e3, all as seen before. And now bishop e2. Peter Lako's move. Played for the first time in 2002. A move which at the outset looked as though it set black lots of problems, but which in fact actually is nothing more than a paper tiger. I mean, when I look at this position, if I'm seeing it for the first time, I think to myself, well, how can black possibly be in any trouble in this position? He's got active play, he's got a nice queen there, and he seems to have a decent pawn influence in the centre. But the fact is, in the game Lako-Krasenkov, Essen 2002, black played e4, white played queen c1, black played queen c6. White seems to have persuaded black to retreat his queen out of the harm's way. F takes e4, f takes e4, rook takes f8, knight takes f8, and Lako played knight b5 with an obvious advantage. And this is the game that put a lot of players off this line for quite some time. Now, going back to bishop e2, there was a game, Kazimzhanov versus Smirnov, played in Greece in 2003, where black played b5 here. This is again quite an interesting move, trying to smash up the white pawns before they get going. I imagine this might actually cause a lot of opponents a few problems psychologically when they see this move. I didn't see that, oh my god, what am I going to do? But in this Kazimzhanov-Smirnov game, white played queen c1. Black took on c4. Now knight b5. I think you could say safely that this is Lako's main idea. Black played bishop b7 in this game. Bishop takes c4. Rook f6. Knight c7. Knight b6. Bishop b5. And now after rook f7, the game was equal. So black can equalise with b5 if he wishes. Going back to bishop e2 now, and finally Belozerov versus Filipov. Then came knight b8, and it's a funny move this, going back to base, but the point of this move is to put the knight on a6 and to try to pressurise the white pawn chain once again. In the game, Belozerov played queen c1, well, along the lines of Lako. Just going back, if white plays queen a3, then knight a6, c5, d takes c5, bishop takes a6. Black has the intermezzo, c takes b4. That's one of the points of the variation, starting with knight b8. So, Belozerov played queen c1, and black retreated with queen b6. If he goes queen takes and plays knight a6, white has knight b5, and black doesn't really want to play the passive rook d8 because of c5, and white has the initiative. So queen b6 was played in the game. White went queen a3. Black played his knight to a6, reaching the optimal configuration. Rook b1. Obviously, if b5, the black knight hops into c5, a beautiful outpost. So Belozerov played rook b1. In came black's queen, causing trouble. Queen came back to b2. Black got his bishop out with bishop d7, and white played bishop f1. Again, white is being denied the move c5 because of d takes c5, bishop takes a6, queen takes b2, rook takes b2, and again the intermezzo, c takes b4. This is a trick worth noting. Two white pieces en prise. So going back to the game, Belozerov played bishop f1. Queen came into d4. The jousting continues, but the black queen is taking up an impressive post here. It really isn't easy to get those white queenside pawns going. So there's a little bit of toing and froing here with rook d1, queen b6, and now rook b1. It might seem as though nothing's going on, but black's next move dispels that illusion. e4. Typical idea in this line, you know, black is always looking to activate those pawns, and black's point is that after f takes e4 and then knight takes e4, black plays bishop f5 with a very, very active position, and well, there are mating ideas on the back rank, and black has obvious compensation for the pawn in this position. In fact, black's position looks preferable to me. So after e4, white decided to block with f4. In came the queen again. White doesn't really want to play g3 here, so he played knight e2. Black played rook c8. Again, it's very hard for white to get those pawns going if he plays queen d4 in this position. Black has the interesting move queen d3, disrupting white's coordination. Now white's got problems on c4 and b1. So white went knight g3. The struggle for coordination continues. g6. Well, I wonder whether black could have taken on f4 in this position. Yes, white does have the trick queen takes g7 check, but this allows the black king to join the action after king f6. And once again, I have to prefer black in this position. It's respective majority time, but black is playing with an extra piece, it seems to me. Black has a slight advantage in this position for sure. But in the game, black decided to play g6. In came the white queen with queen f6. Queen takes f4, and now white played queen e7. Yeah, Rogozenko makes the point that c5 was white's best chance to create some counterplay in this situation. And then after rook f8, queen e7, knight b8, we get a very unclear situation where, okay, white can play c takes d6 in this position, but then his pawns are all smashed up. If he goes queen takes d6, we go queen takes d6, c takes, and then rook f6. And once again, black seems to have a big advantage here. But maybe that was the best chance, because in the game, after queen e7, black again retreated his knight to b8, and then suddenly the white queen was looking a little bit lonely. c5 was played by Belozerov. Rook e8. Queen f6, only move. If white takes on d6, well, black is happy to recapture and then just bring his king in, with by far the better endgame. Again, the king is heading up to e5, and then the capture on d6 will be imminent. So queen f6 was played, queen e5, and tired with all the jousting and getting into time trouble, white played the mistaken move, queen h4. What should he play? He should probably take on e5 and go rook to a1 with unclear play. Black is by no means worse in this situation, but at least white's in the game. But after queen h4, f4 was almost decisive. Well, it was decisive because white resigned. Okay, white didn't need to resign. I mean, maybe he could play knight e2, but then g5. And the thing to remember is black is a pawn up in this position. White gave up that pawn on f4. I don't think white wanted to play this position, frankly. I mean, he's a pawn down. He's got a massive attack to face, and he's got no counterplay to speak of. So that was it. White decided to resign. That was a very interesting game. It featured typical ideas in this line. White didn't seem to find an optimal way to get his queenside pawns rolling. I mean, that is the spectre that black faces in this line. Those queenside pawns coming down the board at the right moment. Perhaps the key moment in this game, well, if we go back to position after bishop e2, was knight e8. Filipov's novelty. Black seemed to find the optimal way to restrain the white queenside pawns, and by active play using the black queen, he kept white at bay and developed play of his own. So typical jousting and an instructive game. I think we now need to see a game where black's kingside pawn majority wins the day, which will give us a typical feel for the way black should handle the line with knight d5. So my next game comes from the European Men's Team Championship, played in 2003. It comes from the match between Macedonia and the Netherlands. Playing white is Zvonko Sanojuski, graded 2497. I hope I've got his name correctly pronounced. I doubt it, but we will proceed. Playing black, I'm more confident with this one, Dutch Grandmaster Friso Niebuhr. And once again we see the contours of the main line of knight d5 coming upon us, with both sides castling, black playing f5, and this time white plays f4 as opposed to f3. f4 is slightly more confrontational. I like it less than f3. It seems to me that it gives black an asset, a passed pawn, which later on might become quite dangerous. However, white might be thinking of using the black pawns on e5 and f5 as targets. You know, a well-timed f takes e5 could well expose those pawns to attack. So it is a sharp continuation, f4, and it should be answered by knight d7. And black intends to answer f takes e5 with knight takes e5, which of course would be a tremendous outpost for the knight. Queen c2 is the main line, and now black reinforces the pawn on f5 with g6. White tucks his king away in the corner, and black has to find a different location for the bishop on e7 this time. The bishop can't come directly to g5, so Nibor plays bishop f6. And now white gets on with the traditional queenside pawn advance. It's just a question of how he wants to do it. Well, I think Stanojevski's idea is to play a5 and then follow that up with a quick b4. He's trying to tie black down. Nibor moves in correctly with knight c5, and then white goes bishop e3. Black plays bishop d7. It's almost as if white is being encouraged to play b4 and loosen himself here. Stanojevski knows that after b4 black's probably going to take on d3 and jab at him with a5, so he prevents black from playing a5, and now white is almost certainly threatening the move b4. So black heads him off with active play, rook c8, b3, and now rook e8. So nothing complicated. All Nibor has basically done is to bring all his pieces into active play. I mean, it really is as simple as that. And it just shows you the Sveshnikov can be handled naturally, intuitively. There's no need to remember vast reams of theory. I mean, if you just remember the basic idea is to activate these kingside pawns. But if you can't do that, if you're restrained from doing that, then just play normal chess, bring all your pieces into the game, and wait to see what happens. Black is juggling twin aims. He's trying to get his own pawns rolling at the same time he's restraining white on the queen side. So it's not that difficult to play this line, in my opinion. White, meanwhile, again, another guy juggling with twin obligations. Rook a3 is a general move in the right direction. White is, of course, trying to force through b4 at the right moment, not at all easy. And black's next move highlights just how difficult it is. Nibor struck out with the excellent move b5, and the point of this is just to gain control of the dark squares. If white takes on b6 here, black goes e4. Now you see my point about this asset, this passed pawn. If bishop e2, queen takes b6, now black's got it all under restraint, and if knight a2, threatening to get the guys going, we just play a5. Meanwhile, if rook b1, a bad move, black plays queen b4, forking two white pieces. So it's not at all easy for white, and for that reason Stanojevski played bishop takes c5. Then came the intermezzo b takes c4, bishop takes c4, rook takes c5, bishop takes a6, rook takes a5. Off came a pair of rooks, and white played his bishop back to c4. And whatever white was hoping for in this position, I'm afraid it's been dashed. Black's now got two active bishops. The queenside pawn majority is a thing of the past. White does have a passed pawn over there, but the pawn is nowhere near ready to advance, and in fact it looks pretty weak to me, that pawn. So of course black is better in this position after e takes f4. There's a sudden attack on c3. Now it's a question of where black goes from here. Well, where he goes is all the way up the king side towards the white king with his pawns, and with this beautiful dark square bishop to help the advance of the pawns, there really should be no further way back for white in this game. And so it proves, with white retreating his knight, black inexorably moving the pawns up with the help of his queen, He safeties his king, king on a dark square, out of range of white pieces. Queen b1, h6, the pawns inexorably come up the board. White offers an exchange. It doesn't help him. As you can see, the black pawns are making significant progress. The best white can do is bail out into an endgame and hope to make a draw. No way is he going to make a draw in this position, with the kingside pawn majority and the king marching in to assist. Bishop f5, knight c7, bishop e4, tying white down completely. b4, h5, b5, and now the crowning glory, h4, after which white decided to resign. Why does he resign? Well, it's fairly simple. If we take bishop f4, or maybe even king f4, but bishop f4 looks fairly convincing, g3, and there's no way those pawns are going to be denied. So a tremendous thematic game by Nibor, and shows the right way for black. My next game comes from a match played in London in 1998 between Jonathan Rowson and Michael Adams. World-class Grandmaster Michael Adams playing black in this game, and it's another example of the line involving knight d5, albeit this time with a slightly different flavour to it. You'll recognise the main line position after knight b8, except that this time, in place of c4, Rowson decides to play a4. This doesn't change things greatly. White is still using the queenside as his natural theatre of action. He's just trying to organise play in a slightly different manner. We don't know yet whether he's going to play with c4 or not. a4 is intended to have a cramping influence on the black position, and white would like nothing better to establish control over the squares, the dark squares on the queen side here. I mean, if we can imagine black playing a6 sooner rather than later, white is very much hoping that the squares a5 and b6 fall into his hands, after which he can grip the queenside and only then perhaps play the typical queenside advancing moves c4 and b4 at the right moment. Well, this didn't faze Adams greatly, and he just continued sensibly by getting his pieces out, bishop e7 and then castles. White does the same sort of thing, and now black plays his knight to d7. I think, just going back, black could equally have played f5. I don't see anything wrong with that, whether white goes a5 and then after a6 knight c3 knight d7, king into the corner, and then bishop f6. Black has typical counterplay, or indeed after f5 whether white goes f4, bishop f6 again, and then f takes e5, bishop takes e5. Again, black has counterplay. I think Adams's move, going back to the game, is more patient. Obviously in this variation, black is looking to advance his kingside pawn majority at the most appropriate moment. I think when you play this line, you've got to keep this idea in mind all the time. You know, we're looking for the right moment to play f5. I think it's a question of style. Adams is a very patient player. He is alert to every nuance in the position, and so he decides to play knight d7 first and keep options open. This is the way the great players play. They don't commit themselves until absolutely necessary, and knight d7 is a move black wants to play anyway, so black delays f5 and plays a useful move instead. So really this is a question of taste. Well, white decided to play f4 and add a further original twist to the position. I mean, it looks more to me, especially after Adams's move a6, like a Najdorf, some sort of Najdorf structure. Usually in this type of structure, when white constructs a dead point on d5 early game, he can't occupy d5 with a piece. It usually gets a very comfortable game, and the subsequent course of Rowson Adams would indicate that this is the case in this particular position as well. Whether white plays f4 or he plays king h1, as was played in the game Zelčić versus Sofsky that Struga played at Struzonal in 1995, where black just played f5, white played f4 to break the attack, a6 drove the knight back to a3, bishop came to f6, pawn up to c3, and black played queen e7, holding the central dark squares with adequate counterplay. I suppose after bishop f6, just going back, white could try knight c4, but then comes knight b6, again with equality for black. As you can see, the pawns on e5 and f5 give black plenty of control in the centre of the board. So back to Rouse and Adams now, and f4. Black played a6, and now comes a move which shows Adams' control of tactics. He played b5. Just dropping back, I've marked the squares c4 and b6 because I think they're so influential in this type of position. White would like nothing better than just a few moves to himself to be able to play moves like knight c4, bishop e3 and a5, and by so doing establish a total grip on the squares on the queen side. This is what black is fighting to avoid, and Adams' b5 does just that. Well, Rowson tucked his king in the corner. Of course, the tactical point to black's last move is that if white takes on b5, black can recapture. And if bishop takes b5, we have queen b6 check, king h1, and now the key move, rook takes a3, taking away the protection of the bishop on b5 and winning material. So that is why in the game white played king h1 and black continued with b takes a4. Of course, now Adams has broken up any potential grip that white would have had if he'd have been allowed to put his pawn on a5. So a successful tactical operation by Adams. Alright, knight c4. E takes f5. Bishop d2. Again, a peculiar looking move, but of course white is intending to put his bishop out on a5. That's the point of this. I mean, when I first saw this game I thought, okay, well, why doesn't white play bishop takes f4? At least there he's hitting the pawn on d6. Black plays knight c5 after that, and if bishop e3, just protects with queen c7. And I quite like black's position. He's a pawn up. Okay, it's not much of a pawn, but black can put his pieces on good squares. That's why I like it. I think if you couldn't see a development plan for black in this position, then you'd have to say white has a pretty good position here with the d4 square under his command. But black's pieces are coming out quite easily. Rook b8, bishop d7, rook e8, and bishop to f6 perhaps. And I think it just looks comfortable for Mickey. So going back to the game, bishop d2 was played. Black played his knight to e5, and white brought his bishop out to a5. Now, if rook takes a4, I'm pretty sure that Adams would have played g5. And if bishop a5, queen e8. If knight takes e5, d takes e5, d6, then bishop f6. Obviously this position is very, very messy, but it mustn't be forgotten that black is a pawn up in this position. He's got a ferocious kingside attack brewing, thanks to his pawn armada on the queen side, the king side. The d pawn is under restraint, and black is already thinking about taking off white's rook. So unclear, yes, but fine for black also, yes. Going back to the game then, bishop a5 was played, queen e8, knight came into b6, and now an interesting move here, f3. I think we call this deflection. If black had played rook b8 straight away, white could go rook takes f4, and now the rook is able to operate on both sides of the board. So f3 is an attempt to jam the white position up. Rowson took with his bishop, and now rook b8 sees this little rook move played in improved circumstances. Alright, bishop comes back to e2, bishop d8, knight takes c8, rook takes c8, bishop to b4. Well, obviously now if white takes on d8, the knight on e5 can become the big boss of the position. I mean, the first point of this is that if queen takes d8, bishop takes a6, then black goes rook b8, and I think this is quite nice for black. Black is shaping up to get a good knight versus bad bishop position, and with both sides having mutual weaknesses, only black can be better in this type of position with his dominant knight. Going back to rook takes c8, if bishop c3, we go bishop b6, and if bishop takes a6, we have the very interesting move rook takes c3, b takes c3, and now bishop c5, with a surprisingly difficult position for white, despite his extra exchange. Well, black's bishop on c5 and his knight on e5 are absolute giants here, and very shortly black is going to push his pawn up to a3. So I think, despite the fact that white is the exchange up in this position, he's worse. He cannot shift black's imposingly placed pieces, and that bishop on d3 is completely lacking in any influence on the position whatsoever. Once the pawn gets to a3, black is in full command. So slightly surprising as an exchange sacrifice, but very effective. So perhaps this all helps to explain why Rowson went bishop b4 and black played bishop c7, protecting his pawn. Now came bishop takes a6, restoring material equality, and black went rook a8. Queen e2, rook b8, bishop c3, and now black went f5. So finally, patiently, Adams has managed to get his f-pawn rolling. Rook comes to f4, and then another interesting move, queen to f7. And the point of this is that if white plays bishop takes e5, black is going rook fe8. Note, not d takes e5, when d6 is rather embarrassing for black, who faces threats to his bishop and also bishop c4. So Rowson decides to keep his bishop with queen d2. Black plays bishop b6, white plays bishop e2, and black finally completes the coordination of his pieces with rook be8. Rook f takes a4. Knight comes into g4. Suddenly there are nasty threats to f2, so white's probably got to take that off. F takes g4, and well, black has very serious compensation here, because as you can see he's already threatening queen f1 with checkmate next move. So white retreated with queen d1, black played h5, and now white probably made a mistake, rook a6. I think this mistake was prompted by time shortage. White should probably go bishop d4 in this position, and after bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, the game is simply unclear. I mean, black is very well coordinated after, for instance, queen f2, but it's all to play for. Instead, after rook a6, queen f2, now black's initiative had assumed very serious proportions. Of course, the main threat is rook e2, not to mention the advance of the kingside pawns, h4 and then h3. So white chopped on b6, queen takes b6, queen d3, queen f2, rook g1, and now queen f5. Over the next few moves, black shunts his major pieces into more and more influential positions, and eventually gets the chance to invade. So rook e4, queen d2, h4, bishop takes d6, rook d7, bishop a3, rook takes d5. And the time control having been reached, white decided to resign this position. Black's major pieces are of course extremely dominant here. Black is threatening to prize open white's king with h3, and white has no counterplay to speak of. If white had any checks, or he had any possibility to advance those queenside pawns, then I think it might be worth playing on. But as it is, black is in full control, and well, there's scarcely a good move for white, so Rowson decided to resign. Now obviously this was a very messy game, typical of the type of play that results from 7 knight d5, but you couldn't say that black was worse at any stage. It was simply a game of chess where the better player was going to win. I think the way Adams sacrificed material to try and take the initiative was very instructive, and altogether a pretty good and educational Sveshnikov game. My final game involving the move knight d5 comes from the Slovakian Championship in 2007 in Ljubljana. Playing white is a guy called Dejan Podrasky, and playing black is Indira Bhatt. And this is a particularly interesting game because it features a move which is very unusual here, Queen F3, but which was recommended in a book, Secrets of Opening Surprises by Jerome Bosch. And therefore this is precisely the type of tricky move which a lot of your opponents are going to play, precisely because they're following the analysis seen in this book, which was, however, a little bit optimistic from White's point of view. Now it's obvious that a move like Queen F3 is very tricky. What is the point of it? Well, White is attempting an audacious strike on D6, and he's going to try and mount pressure with the help of moves such as Queen A3 and then Bishop D2 to B4. Now, from where I'm sitting, it will be very, very unlikely, using logic, to imagine that this idea could succeed. I mean, the first thing about it is it's rather slow. However, Black has to be quite accurate in meeting this idea. But if Black knows his stuff, then really there's nothing to fear, and the White pieces can be driven back if Black plays at all accurately. So let's see how this is done now. And before I go on, I just want to mention the move C3 here. Again, this is a very tricky move. White is intending Queen A4 and then Queen A3, the same type of thing, putting pressure on D6. I think Black just meets C3 very comfortably indeed by playing his bishop out to E7 and castling, after which the Queen on A4 and the pawn on C3 simply look misplaced. So that's nothing to worry about. Queen F3 is answered in the same logical manner. I think Black should play A6 first of all, and when the Queen swings across to A3, he should play Bishop E7 and just castle, and allow White to play his tricky variation. Now in the game Podrasky versus Bart, surprisingly perhaps, White played Bishop D3. This is still a move which is rather tricky. I must show you what happens after Bishop B4, because at first sight that looks very dangerous. This seems to be the point of White's entire variation. However, Black now has an excellent move suggested by Grandmaster Rogozenko, not at all obvious at first sight, Queen to D7. And whilst I hesitate to say that this move refutes White's idea, it certainly pushes the White pieces back. Now the first point of this move is that White can't take on D6 straight away with either bishop or knight. So in a sense Black is setting a trap himself. If White takes with the knight, it's actually quite simple. Black jabs at the bishop twice with A5 and B6 and wins material. It's most unfortunate for White the Queen and bishop are on the same diagonal. Going back to Queen D7, if bishop takes D6, then A takes B5, and if Queen takes A8, bishop takes D6. The point of the Queen move, of course, to D7 is to deny White the opportunity to take on E7, which would in turn hit the Black Queen if the Queen was still on D8. So this enables Black to go through with this cunning exchange idea here, and Black has emerged material ahead. Going back to Queen D7, Bishop D3 is a tricky move, and well, let's just see if Black can play B6 here. And the point of Bishop D3 is that after knight takes D6 A5, White might be thinking about moves like Bishop F5. However, Black has prepared the ground well for the splendid move Queen takes F5, and if knight takes F5, Bishop takes B4, and again Black is winning material here. So it seems that after Bishop D3 B6, White's probably got to castle, and now Black has another excellent move here, E4, which again pushes the White bishop back. Of course, Bishop takes E4 is no longer possible due to Queen takes B5. So after E4, White's got to go backwards. Black plays Bishop B7, attacking the knight finally, and after knight D4, Black plays Bishop takes D5, and of course Black is in very good shape. Please note, the knight cannot go back to C3 in this position due to A5, and the biter has been bit. White, the trapper, has been trapped himself. So I hope this demonstrates that Bishop B4 is not quite the dangerous weapon that Bosch claimed, and Queen D7 is a really excellent reply, which might help us to explain why White went Bishop D3 in this game and Black pushed up with F5. We revert to normal play, and Black gets his kingside majority going. Okay, well, white rather stubbornly refuses to retreat and castles on the queen side. Now comes b6, f4, bishop b7, and finally white's knight has to go back, after which black completes his development with knight c7. And what we've got here is a relatively normal looking position, but I think black is in good shape. I think the white queen is misplaced, and that the queen in fact could become a target for advancing black pawns. I mean, what's to stop black from playing b5 in this position, rook c8, knight c5, e4 perhaps, with an excellent queenside initiative. White tries to intercept the idea of knight c5 by playing bishop e3, but Bart plays bishop knight c5 anyway. Okay, white thinks this knight is so strong it's got to be removed, and the capture is that white wanted to take on e5 and go d6. Fortunately for black, bishop g5 check is a good move, and after king b1, Bart went king h8 in the full knowledge that white could on c5 in this position. Black calculated the tactics very well in this game. After bishop takes g2, the position's opening up, black's king is perfectly safe in the corner, and well, the tactical skirmishes are going to favour black in this position with two nice bishops, and as you'll see, the possibility of a very quick attack on the dark squares against the poor old white king. Well, white thinks he sees a tactic here and plays bishop takes e4, hoping to take advantage of the slightly loose nature of the bishop on g5. Black was alert to this possibility and played rook c8, and after queen e5, Bart went in with the lovely move rook takes c3. Well, obviously if queen takes c3, we've got bishop takes e4. If bishop takes f3 as in the game, now the dark squares started to creak after bishop f6, queen d5, and now queen to b6, one of those opposite colour bishop positions where white is forced into making weakening moves, and now black is moving in for the kill with ideas such as queen a3. White could find nothing better than king c1, and now black played rook d8, hitting the d pawn one more time. d7, rook comes back to c7, and now white continues with this rather tricky play, rook e1. Black's next move ensured that when he captured on d7 and white captured back, he would be able to recapture with check, driving the king to the d file, a most unfavourable circumstance for white, so that black could play rook c takes d7 in peace. White played his only move, rook e8 check, but black played a simple little idea now to finish the game. He took on e8, queen takes d7, and then played rook d8. So another splendid demonstration of dark square counterplay there in this variation by black. And well, if we just retrace all the way back to knight b8 and then queen f3. Queen f3 is a dangerous move. You have to know what to do against it, but I hope I've shown that if white goes through fully with this plan and plays his queen to a3 and his bishop up to b4, then queen d7 is a more than adequate reply. Let's summarise the game plan after knight d5 now. Here we are, knight comes into d5. There are two very important things I want you to remember. The first thing is that you should always take on d5 and put the knight back on b8. The knight's not going to stay on b8 for very long. Although black's setup looks rather defensive and retrograde, that knight is soon going to redeploy itself via d7 to a better square. The second and most important feature of the position is your central and kingside pawn majority. You're looking to activate that majority at the earliest possible moment. Usually in this variation it's a strategical battle of flank attacks. White will try to establish dominance on the queen side, and you will try to counter that with a kingside pawn advance or establishing a strong foothold in the centre. The e5 square could well become a centre for black operations. As long as you keep the idea of energetic counterplay in mind, I think you should be able to combat this variation successfully.